Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Society of the Eternal Mile podcast. I'm your host, Noah Sias. On today's episode, we're joined by guitarist Rafe Holmes. Rafe is best known for his work in Austin, Texas-based hardcore band Insvrgence. Make sure you're following the show on social media at SOTEM Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast app or on YouTube. Leave a review if you have a spare moment, and also be sure to check out the show's Patreon at patreon.com/SOTEM Podcast. Hope everyone is surviving the holiday madness going on right now. Safe travels to anything you might be going to. As always, to my tour family, stay safe out there if any of you are grinding out these last couple weeks of the year. I know the weather's slowly starting to turn bad for most of the winter states, so just stay safe out there. So let's get started with the show. My first interaction with Rafe was in the summer of 2015 on the Vertebroken tour. We were in Boise, Idaho, at a now defunct venue known as The Crux. Insvrgence were also on tour at the time. Unbeknownst to us, we thought they were a local from the area. After exchanging some contact info and some upcoming tour dates, we found ourselves playing with them again for a couple dates later in the run. Rafe has some crazy stage energy, which I always appreciate. Off stage, he's a real down-to-earth guy who always is a great time to be around. We haven't shared the stage since that run, but we've managed to see each other a couple other times, and we also keep very regular tabs on each other through social media. All that said, I haven't really had the opportunity to hear the finer details about him, so I figured this would be a great setting to do that. So here's my conversation with Rafe Holmes. Rafe, welcome to the show.
Hi, Noah. Thanks for having me.
So let's start from the beginning. When did you first get involved with music?
I first got involved with music. I was in the band in middle school and high school, part of high school. And I remember I really wanted to be a drummer. And the night before the middle school auditions, I stayed up all night playing Crash Bandicoot with my best friend. So I showed up to the rehearsal or whatever, the audition, just totally out of it. And basically just ended up sounding like Pip farting on a snare drum. Like, it was bad. So they were like, get out of here, go to the woodwind section, sort your fucking life out, you know? And so I tried doing woodwinds, and I sucked at that. So then they sent me to the brass room, and I could kind of make a sound on a mouthpiece. So they're like, this is perfect. So you can do brass. And I was like, well, I really want to do tuba, because my best friend at the time, Royce, was doing tuba. So I was like, I want to do that. And you know me, I'm a small man. And in middle school, I was even smaller. I was 45 pounds.
Oh my God.
And so they were like, you're too small. You can't play the tuba. So let's try the trombone. And I was on board with that because I was a big Donkey Kong fan. And in Donkey Kong 64, Lanky Kong played a trombone. So I was like, if he can do it, I can do it. And so I did that for about a year. And then they said that my arms were too short and they needed euphonium players. So basically my start in music was I wanted to be a drummer, but I got demoted to bitch tuba. So I did that for a while, and in 8th grade, I guess this is like when I really got into the kind of music that I'm doing now, is I found my mom's old acoustic guitar in her closet, and I was like, well, this is cool. I'm going to try to learn some System of a Down songs or something like that. And it was fucking awful. It was bad. I didn't learn how to use a pick for like 6 months or something. I would just bang it out on my thumb, and all the alternate picking riffs, I would just play like the main note and not the root. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, like I was trying to learn Unholy Confessions, and instead of going like, I was just doing the main notes and not the alternate picking,
Right,
But
right.
of course, at the time, I was like, fucking nailed it, dude. I got this. I know how to play this.
I have a very similar story for myself when I was starting with music. I'm a percussionist, and I happened to get into guitars and keyboards and all that kind of stuff like later on. But when I first started playing guitar, I had this weird thing about me where like I was all self-taught, still am. I used to play with my thumb on the fretboard in dropped.
Oh, classic. Yeah.
And as much as it kills me to say it, the band that taught me how to play guitar was Rammstein.
Oh, dude, they're hard as hell. Like no shame in the game, dude.
I thought it was so cool because I could champ through almost all of their songs except for the standard tuning ones, but I just tuned it down anyway and like figured it out as I went. And yeah, but I'm sure thinking back now, I probably was terrible at the time, but I thought I was definitely cool.
Oh, but you need that. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you think you're shit, you're not going to want to play anymore. So you need this like false confidence that you're like a god to keep going,
Right.
I remember kind of on that tip, one of the first bands I was in, I just never thought about power chords, I guess, which sounds fucking stupid, but I would play slam riffs on one string, and I ended up joining a band with this guitar player, and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm chugging, dude." And he was like, "That's not chugging." And he showed me a power chord, and I was like, "Whoa, like that is so much heavier." And he's like, "Yeah, you're an idiot." And I was like, "Well, you're right." So it's crazy, all these little things that you kind of pick up along the way. It's the joys of being self-taught, I guess.
So you kind of touched on a couple, but who were some of your early influences getting started?
My biggest influence as a player, and honestly, it carries over into Insvrgence, is System of a Down. I saw, the first time I ever heard him, a childhood friend of mine, the same one I stayed up all night playing Crash with, he had LimeWire. And
oh yeah,
he ripped that first System of a Down album for me, and I heard it, and I was like, "Oh my god, I've never heard anything like this before." I saw a set they played in Australia on the Big Day Out festival, and the guitar player Darren or Daron, I suck, I don't know how you pronounce it, but he was like pulling down his pants and like spinning around and just going crazy. I'd never seen a band, act that way on stage before. So that I was like, that's what I want to do. Whenever I saw him wigging out like that, I was like, that's when I wanted to take guitar playing more seriously.
Sure.
So System of a Down, Metallica. Like I had an older brother, and he showed me all the Big Four thrash and stuff like that. Avenged Sevenfold, like old Avenged Sevenfold stuff.
As I had mentioned in a previous episode, I kind of had a similar thing where it was like, you're listening to what your dad's listening to or what, an older sibling is listening to. And one of the first like heavy albums for me to check out was the Mortal Kombat soundtrack.
Man.
Because it had Fear Factory and it had Napalm Death on it.
Damn, dude.
And I'm literally like, I'm in the single digits for my age, and I'm hearing this, and my mind is just literally blown.
Oh yeah, I mean, because it's a magical moment the first time you hear something like that, because you have what you think, what everyone tells you music is supposed to sound like, and then you hear Napalm Death, and you're like, well, this is wrong. Like, this isn't the Beatles, you know what I mean? Or like what my parents are listening to. And
right.
It's just so cool, because your mind is literally opened up, and you're like, oh my God, it's a whole world of possibility.
And it's funny too, because for me, if if my memory serves me right, that predates me hearing about like Korn and Limp Bizkit for the first time too, which arguably those bands are heavy, but it's not Napalm Death, Fear Factory heavy.
Oh, it's not the same kind. And I think that's really interesting that you said that, because a lot of people, their transition into, at least our age bracket, their transition into heavier music was through nu metal.
Absolutely.
Because the low-tuned guitars, it was marketed. I mean, it was on MTV. It was Fuse. You know, you could hear a Korn song on the radio. We had a local radio station called 101X, and it's still around, but they don't play heavy shit anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to hear System of a Down songs all the time. It was just a crazy time, man, because a band like System of a Down, I just don't think that they would be as big as they are if they came out in today's climate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with a lot of those bands, it was literally creating their own market in a sense that had immediate like mainstream success, which is interesting. But tell us about some of your early bands.
The very first band I was ever in, we were called Delaying the Downfall, and I was 15. So I'd only really been playing the guitar for like a year at this point. So it was so bad. Like, we didn't really know what we wanted to be. It was like, you know, our biggest influences, I came up in deathcore. That was the first music outside of like System of a Down. The popular bands that I heard was like As Blood Runs Black, Despised Icon, you know, that whole deathcore movement. And so we were like tuned low, and we just played really bad alternate picking riffs that weren't really alternate picked. And we had two vocalists because it was 06 and you had to.
Right.
And yeah, our first show, we only played 2 shows ever. And I think our first one was with we opened for this tour package. It was Arsonist All the Girls was the headliner, and they were like one of my favorite bands in high school, so I was like geeking out. And Straight from the Path was the opening band. My Children, My Bride, and For the Fallen Dreams. So that it was a pretty sick tour, and seeing all those bands too. For the Fallen Dreams is one of the bands that like got me into hardcore, because before that, like I said, I kind of just listened to deathcore and, you know, some like slam stuff like Dying Fetus and stuff like that. But so yeah, we were terrible. We broke up like a year after we started. After that, I joined a tech death band with a friend of mine, and he was the one who was like, "Hey, you're an idiot. You're not chugging right." And he was probably, to this day, the most influential guitar player in my life. His name's Chris Hillam, and he plays in a tech death band from Austin, Texas now called Cathesis. That's pretty sick. And he would play these riffs, and he would show them to me, and I would just have to like poker face it, but I'd be like, "Oh, I can't fucking play that." So he'd show me the riff, and I'd be like, "Oh, I got it." And then I'd go home and just like practice for hours, you know, to a metronome. And that's really what got my chops up, was playing with this player who was worlds better than me. And I think that everybody has one of those in their lives, like the person who really pushes them forward as a player. So even though that band, we only played 1 show and then broke up, I'll always be grateful for that project because it really pushed me forward as a player. But yeah, we didn't do shit. That was the only 2 bands I was really in like high school.
And then later on, you would be in Set for Defeat.
After the tech death band had broken up, I'd been in heavy bands, like, you know, all throughout high school. So I just started getting into my senior year. I started getting into like pop punk, because I feel like there's two different kinds of people. There's the people who got into like pop punk and then got into heavy music, and then there's people who got into heavy music and then kind of went to the softer side as well. And I think what really helped with that was the easycore movement, because it appealed to both audiences. So I didn't get into pop punk bands until I heard like 4 Year Strong and A Day to Remember and stuff like that, and I was like, well, it's like Blink, but it's got breakdown, so I'm on board with that, And so we were basically, I had this idea, and I think bands have done it since then, but I was like, I want to take what I learned in tech deaf and make it major and do this like almost like, I called it like easy deaf like project, but really it ended up just sounding like Evergreen Terrace or something like that, because we played major alternate picking riffs, and then we'd play some breakdowns every once in a while and stuff like that. But I first met James, the vocalist of Insvrgence, through that. He just moved here from Tennessee, and we found him on Craigslist. And I'll never forget it, dude. We're at the jam spot. We're like, where is this guy? And we were all 18 at the time, so we were really young. And James is a little bit older. And this guy walks up with a Breathe If You're Horny hat on from the Squidbillies show. And we're like, is this the guy? And it ended up being James. And we were like, oh my God, like, that's sick, And it ended up being a good fit, because he was in a couple bands in Tennessee that did singing and screaming stuff, so he could do both really well. And we just kind of burned ourselves out, honestly, and because we'd practice like 4 times a week or something stupid like that, because we just graduated high school, so we're like, fuck it, dude, let's just fuck community college, we're gonna play some breakdowns. So really like golden age, where you're in between real life and school still, so you kind of just do what you want. And so we did that, and the songs we were writing kept getting heavier and heavier, and the members, like half the members, were kind of over it and wanted to do other things. So in the end of 2010, me and James started working on Insvrgence songs, and that's kind of how the band started, was at that moment when Set for Defeat dissolved and we decided to do this other project.
As I mentioned in your intro, we met summer of 2015. So at that time, Insvrgence had been going on for a little bit. Before we get into that, I'd like to make a comment about a piece of merch I have from you guys that has a weird attraction with people.
Really?
Sometimes I have to consciously say to myself, don't wear the shirt today because you're not trying to talk to that many people. Literally everywhere. So it's the Tower shirt with the We Are Pure Evil. Yeah, I have been asked in so many states, hey, what does your shirt mean? What's this? What's that? I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, and I've said, hey, it's a band out of Austin, Texas. Go check them out. But nice. The funnier thing is like, yeah, some people will be like, okay, that's a band shirt for sure. But then people want to like have this big talk to me about, well, why are we all pure evil? Just go check the band out, and then they'll tell you why.
They'll tell you why. Yeah, that's sick, dude. Well, I'm sorry all the uncomfortable conversations you've had that have been stemmed from that shirt.
But you know what? Sometimes it's funny. It's really funny to see how uncomfortable people can get over a little bit of like controversy like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, I get it, I guess, in a way, because, without any context at all, people read that and they're like, well, I'm not evil, and my grandma Margie's not evil, so why are you wearing a shirt saying we're evil? You know what I mean? So people just, they don't know the context, but at the same time, I mean, I don't think they care to know the context most of the time.
No, they're just they're offended by a questionable shirt with a guy who's got a questionable beard and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So this rigmarole in my town, that kind of thing.
But anyway, I thought I'd just run that one by you. So let's continue on from the beginning of Insvrgence.
So we started really in like 2010. We had this guitar player named Ricky, who ended up leaving the band without ever quitting. So we like to joke around and say that he's still in the band. He's like the third guitar player because he never quit. He just ghosted one day. We were like, hey, man, see you at practice. And he was like, uh-huh. And, if you're listening to this, Ricky, I hope you're doing well. And, you've been late to the past 600 practices. So get your shit together. Then we had this drummer, Will, he was really good, but he was just like super stoner, and he would forget the set like every practice. So we would just have to like relearn the entire set, which was really annoying. But so we just kind of like, we played as many local shows as we possibly could for like a couple years, and we played the surrounding areas like Waco and San Antonio and Dallas, and we kind of just did the regional stuff. We'd released an EP just so we could get on shows, because a lot of promoters won't book you if you don't have music up, which that's totally fair, makes sense. Why would you book a band that doesn't have any music? So we put something out that we did ourselves on a laptop in James's apartment, that actually ended up having a couple songs that we used on the Tower on it. And it was bad, because we just kind of did it ourselves, and, we just wanted to get something out there. That's what we wanted to play shows. That's what we wanted to do. So we just kind of threw this thing out there. It might still be floating around. I don't know, but
gotcha.
So that we released that, played a lot of local gigs, and in 2013, that's when we put out our first record, The Tower, which is what that shirt is from. And it did okay. And we had gotten a couple new members at that time. We got our drummer, Ryan Brookshire, and we got our guitar player, Drew. He also plays in Fire from the Gods. He's like a founding member of that band. And we had this guy named Biss on bass, but it ended up just not really working out with him. So we got this guy, Jacob Mercado, and that was the lineup that stayed together for the longest, and that you met us with, was that lineup. So we played, that's when we started touring, was when we put out The Tower. So we did like a lot of regional runs, and then we did our first West Coast tour that year with 40 Winners from Florida. And Dealey Plaza was supposed to be on it, but they like dropped the first day. They like showed up to the venue or whatever, and Xavier calls, I think it was Brian from Dealey Plaza, was like, hey, where y'all at? And they're like, oh, we're not coming. And it was just kind of like, oh, well, fair enough. So that happened, and we had a van at the time that was, we called it the Crimson Wave because it was a maroon Dodge piece of shit van. And God damn, that thing was awful. It was meant to carry, soccer moms around, not really pulling a bunch of gear and all that, So very first tour we took it on, that one with 40 Winners, it broke down twice. Transmission bearings broke.
Jeez.
So our first experience with touring was literally the lowest of the low. So I'm kind of glad we got that out of the way, because it made every tour after that seem awesome.
Sure.
It's like, oh, the van only broke down once this tour? Sick, But yeah, after that, we basically just toured as much as we could in the following years. And in 2014, we got in contact with Inner Strength Records, and they agreed to re-release our first record, and then also release Every Living Creature Dies Alone, which was our second record. And so that was the timeline on that. We ended up getting there. That's like a crazy long story. The whole recording process with Every Living Creature Dies Alone was it was a nightmare. It was so bad. But basically, long story short, we ended up getting the record. We were supposed to get it early April, but we got it in late October is when it ended up coming out. So we were touring all year on this record that wasn't even out yet. You know what I mean? Because at the time, up until 2016, I was booking all of our tours myself. So I had booked all these tours for that year because I thought we were going to be promoting the album. And we were on tour from April all the way until like September. So that was brutal, you know. And, but that's when we met you, so that was pretty sick.
Sure. I can relate to that whole situation because that tour was my first tour. I had been in contact with Bermuda back in 2014 at near the end, and we had Use Your Burdens done. Like, it was all tracked in December of 2014, and it didn't come out until Christmas 2015.
Yeah.
And I had done 3 tours on brand new songs.
So yeah, I remember y'all played a lot of songs from that record on that tour.
Yeah, and so with having next to no like support, you know, great. Hey, when's the record coming out? Oh, soon. And hitting these same markets again. When's the record coming out? Soon. And then, you know, it finally comes out on Christmas, digital only.
Yeah. That was through Media Scare.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that they had kind of stopped. I was surprised they put it out because I thought they were done doing bands for a while.
Well, I think they're for sure done now, especially after the whole like volumes taking them to court.
Oh, I didn't even know that happened.
Yeah, they took them to court over like missing royalty payments and stuff like that. So I think we were kind of like the last active band at the time. So, but yeah, I don't think they're a thing anymore. So as you mentioned, Inner Strength put out both of your releases there. And are you still with them?
We just ended our contract with Inner Strength. We have a lot of new stuff that we're sitting on, so we're shopping around at the moment.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so that's where that stands.
So you guys released a single in October called Third World America, which is super sick.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Like nasty riffs and even nastier music video.
Thank you. I really wanted the music video is like a metaphor for complacency with the general population in U.S. politics. It's based off of this movie called My Mother's Eyes. This guy comes to this little farmhouse, ends up killing the mother of that family. The dad beats the shit out of the murderer guy and locks him in the barn. This little girl, she has no friends or anything because she lives on a farm. So she ends up befriending this guy who murdered her mother. And it's just a really weird dynamic. So in the music video, there's that guy. He gets abducted. He's chained in his this like basement thing. At the end of the video, someone ends up coming into the house and discovering that he's there. But the guy had his eyes removed and his vocal cords cut out. So he literally has like almost no senses. So he ends up strangling the only person who could have saved him because he thinks it's his enemy. And it's like almost a Stockholm Syndrome type scenario with his captor, because the captor has been keeping him alive, you know, like feeding him and, you know, all that stuff. So over time, it's kind of just like how people will make excuses for politicians and for billionaires or something because they hope one day they'll be a billionaire. So they just they shine the boot that's on their throat because they hope that one day they'll be in that situation. It's kind of just like a Stockholm Syndrome kind of thing.
So is that just a single or is that a sign of things to come?
That's just a single. We've got another single that's kind of in the works as well, but it's unreleased. I think we're going to release it in the winter.
What's in store for Insvrgence for 2018?
We've got a tour in January that hits pretty much the whole U.S. with Castaway from California. They're like a really cool band. They're kind of like Counterparts or something like that. Just melodic with some sour notes, breakdowns here and there. We'll hopefully be doing some regional stuff in February. Supposed to be doing a split in March. Yeah, so we're just basically going to release a lot of new music and do a lot of touring because we've kind of had to take the last year off from touring for a little bit because our bass player ended up leaving, our longtime bass player, and he's the one who owned the van. So we had to buy a new van, and then our vocalist James was having some health problems. So he had to take some time off in order to sort those out and get a little more stable.
You've also had the opportunity to work for a couple bands as a fill-in. Who have you worked with?
My first fill-in job was with this band called Aether. They're a tech death band out of California. And we went on tour with them, and they were like, hey, their bass player is in After the Burial now. He couldn't make the tour because I think he was on Summer Slaughter or Warped Tour or something. I think it was Summer Slaughter. And so they needed a bass player. And I was like, well, I used to play tech death, and I'm going to be on the tour anyway. So I'll fill in for you guys. And that one was kind of tricky because all their songs are on a 6-string bass because they tune really low. So what I had to do is I had to learn the songs on my guitar, like the fingerings, but the notes were all off because I couldn't, tune it because the tension would have messed up my neck, So I was learning these songs in a completely different tuning, and I was like, well, I hope this is right because, it's kind of just working with what I got. And but it ended up working out okay. We had a tour with Spite and Body Snatcher that bled into that Aether run. So I was on that Spite tour. When I had some downtime, I would basically just run their set and all that. So that one was fun. I recently did a fill-in job for Kubla Khan this summer on a tour they did with Miss May I and Upon a Burning Body and Currents. And their fill-in player, Jason, ended up having appendix problems. So at the time, I was working at an insecticide factory and at my Chinese food job place to try to save up some money for all the band expenses and stuff like that. And Eric from Kubla Khan calls me, and he was like, hey, do you want to fill in on guitar on this tour we have? Jason can't do it because he's having a medical emergency. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. So I flew out to Vegas that night, and we sat in the parking lot of the venue for like 6 hours before the show and just ran through the sets. I mean, I went into it. I had learned a couple songs by ear, but most of it I kind of had to learn from scratch. So yeah, we learned the songs in the parking lot and played a show that night, and that's, the rest of the tour ended up being like almost a month, I think, and ended up going pretty well. It was fun. I've also done, there's a lot of pop punk bands here in Austin who are like my friends. So if they ever need a fill-in, I'll always just fill in for them. Like there's a band called Nominee that I filled in for. This band called Burning Years that I filled in for on guitar. Heisman, football, pop punk, hell yeah.
So let's change it up and talk about gear. What's your signal chain looking like these days?
I've got my good old handy-dandy PV6505 Plus that I run, and I run that into my Omega cabinet, which is a 5x12 with a 15 in it. So it's got half vintage 30s and half greenbacks. Brings the beef. On my pedal chain, I just run a Polytune 2 with an electro-harmonic pitchfork Maxon OD808, one of those MXR microamps to boost it a little bit, and then I run an ISP decimator pre and post to really tighten things up for the choppy breakdowns and pauses and stuff like that.
What kind of guitars do you have?
I have LTD Viper 1000. That's my baby. I remember I got that because I watched that As Blood Runs Black video for My Fears Have Become Phobias, and their guitar player at the time, Ernie, was playing one, and I was like, that guitar's the shit. I'm going to use that. I'm going to play some metalcore riffs on that thing. And that's where we're at now. And then I have a Moniker custom baritone that I use, 28.5 scale. It's got a lace deathbucker in it. It's really good at picking up the low end. And I've currently got a guitar in the construction process from Wasteland Guitars. Jeremy from this band Designs runs the company. They're like this awesome, just like Converge kind of like, you know, we're going to play in 5/4 and play a bunch of sour notes and have noise, and they're just a really cool band if you've never checked them out. But he runs the company, and he's making me a custom baritone. Like, every part of it is completely custom. That's what I really like about Jeremy is he makes the fretboards. You can choose out your own wood for that. You can choose out your own top. You can choose out the body. The one he's making me, it's a 28.5 scale with a ebony fretboard, and then it's got a spalted maple top, and it's neck through with flame maple and walnut. Hip shot hardware. I'm finally getting some bare knuckles, the painkillers to put in it. And it's kind of like a Thunderbird and an Iceman. That's what the body looks like. Me and him just drew it out on a napkin. So I'm really excited about that. And he's a good friend who does good work, so I'm happy to support him.
Now, your moniker has been ripped away from you and returned, yeah?
Oh, yeah. That was a wild ride. On New Year's, I went out to eat at my favorite Chinese restaurant called 888. And I came back. I went there like right after band practice, so my guitar was in my car. And somebody threw this giant stepping stone through my window and ended up taking my guitar. And I was like, well, you know, probably never going to see it again. I was really upset. And a month later, the cops ended up doing a drug bust at this heroin dealer's house. And the cop was a guitar player, and he saw the guitar on this guy's couch. And he was like, what brand is that? I've never seen that kind of guitar before. And the guy obviously didn't know shit about it. So that tipped him off that it was stolen. So they seized it, and I went in and filled out a report and got it back. It was pretty crazy.
Nice. You don't hear too many. You don't hear too many success stories like that.
Oh no, I'm super grateful. It was in standard tuning though, so oof. I had to get it set up a little bit. I guess he'd been playing like Sublime covers or something. I don't know.
Anything on the wish list currently?
I kind of just for me, they're re-releasing. They're doing another Viper baritone. And I just want one because, God damn it, I love the Viper series. It's just so sick to me. But I'm very content with like my setup, so I don't really have much else that I really want.
So let's have a discussion about the Eternal Mile. When was your first tour, and what was the lineup?
That West Coast tour with 40 Winners in 2013. Our lineup then was strange because Drew had a wedding that he had to go to, so we had a fill-in guitar player for like part of it, and our bassist Mercado could only do the Texas dates, so we had a fill-in bass player for like the last half. So it was this weird hodgepodge of people who were just hopping in and hopping out, and so we did that. And like I said, our van broke down twice, and that was just a crazy tour because it was our first tour and all that was happening, and gas was at like $5 a gallon in California, so it was just really expensive. But the craziest tour story I think we have happened on that tour, where our drummer at the time, Ryan Brookshire, he grew up with Chase Ford from the Vikings, and Ryan posted some picture while we were in Vegas, like, hey, I'm at this casino, like, party time, rock and roll. And Chase Ford saw it, and he was like, hey, you're in Vegas, I'm in Vegas, so let's, like, link up, because they hadn't seen each other since they were kids. And so we met up with Chase Ford from the Minnesota Vikings, and he ended up taking us in, like, a limo to the fanciest strip club in Vegas, which was really strange because they didn't want to let any of us in because we look like shit. You know, because we've been on tour, you know, we're wearing grubby ass clothes, and yeah, so it was just like us with the Minnesota Vikings at this strip club, and we're all just like broke. So we were just kind of chilling there. I ended up talking to the strippers about like Kill Switch Engage and like, you know what I mean? Like, so it was pretty cool. I remember Drew spent like he bought a beer, and it ended up being like $16 for a Lone Star, and he almost had a stroke. And our fill-in bass player at the time, Ian, he got the nickname Strippers, Hats, and Weed because all of his money ended up going towards strippers, hats, and weed. So he had to like get money wired to him like 5 times or some dumb shit like that.
Jeez.
Needless to say, that was his first and last tour. But yeah, that was the first tour we ever did, was with 40 Winners in 2013.
If you had to guess between local shows and shows on the road, how many have you done to date?
Oh, I know in 2015 we played over 150 shows. So Insvrgence has probably played maybe like, we toured pretty heavy, 2013 all the way through now. So if we were doing like 150 shows a year, maybe like 800 or something. I don't know. It's up there.
Sure.
Because when we first started, we played, like, we were doing like 3 shows a week. Like, it was stupid. But it was just one of those things where, and this is my personal opinion from my personal experience, but, you know, people always say, like, oh, you should only play 1 local show a month and all that, to, you know, so your fan base doesn't get burnt out. But when you don't have a fan base, you have to play as much as possible in order to stick in these people's heads. So what we did was we played a lot of local shows like Free Metal Thursday, you know, any DIY gig that would pop up, stuff like that where we don't get paid and it's low risk for the promoter. So, because the main complaint is that, you know, whenever you play a bunch, you're hurting promoters because people aren't going to see you as much. And so you play these gigs that are low risk to promoters where they just want, you know, bands to play. You play as many of those as possible to get your name out and get other bands in the community to know your name, and you can become friends with them. So then you can build enough clout to open these national shows, and that's when you kind of simmer it down to like a show a month or whatever. But when you're first starting out, hustle, baby.
Absolutely.
Like, play as many shows as you can, you know, because people, they're not going to latch onto your name the first show you play, you know. If you're just starting out and you're only playing once a month, like, that's not enough to have people stick in your heads.
Any favorite markets you like to play in?
I love Colorado. Colorado Springs has always been great to us. Our first show there was 2014, and we played at this place with Triumph Over Shipwreck. We played with them at the Triple Nickel, and there was fights, and we got free pitchers of Dr. Pepper, and it was just so sick. And there's this guy, Brian Ostro, who booked us, and he's been booking us ever since, you know, in Colorado, and he's just a great dude. Runs a DIY venue that recently got shut down, but it's reopening, called the Flux Capacitor.
I've played there.
Yeah, amazing. Really, him and his brother are such sweethearts. They're in bands, so they know what it's like to be touring DIY and having to struggle.
Sure, and it's interesting because we played at that venue on the Macho Man tour, and we walked into that venue and we got pretty bummed out pretty quick, just because like we hadn't had too many like super DIY venue situations.
Yeah,
And we left that place thoroughly stoked. The crowd was great. The stage and the setup was good enough. And we actually walked out of there because I believe that was a door deal for us, but it actually worked out nicely.
Yeah, they just have a very supportive community down there. And what I love most about them is like they like all kinds of heavy. You know what I mean? Like they like groovy bands. They like just straight up 90s hardcore sounding kind of bands. They like deathcore bands. As long as it's good, they like it.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of rare sometimes. And sometimes I feel like in particular scenes, there's one genre of music that gets really popular, and if you don't fit into that little mold, then nobody's going to come out to your show.
How about favorite city to have a day off in?
For a while, we would do like just go to nature stuff. So I would say my favorite place, this is on record now, my favorite place for a day off is in the Pacific Northwest, like anywhere in that area, because the weather's beautiful. There's a lot of free nature spots to go to, because that's usually like all we can afford to do. Is just go see some nature.
Sure.
Like I remember on a tour we did in July of 2015. Oh, I guess it was right before we met up with y'all or right after or something. We spent a night in the Redwood Forest on James's birthday, and that was probably the coolest off day we've ever had.
Nice.
It just makes you feel like when you look at those trees, you're like, does life matter?
Yeah, exactly.
all my problems seem so insignificant when I look at this grand spectacle. So
yeah.
That was a really powerful experience that I'll never forget. And I'm grateful that DIY touring made it possible for me to go there.
Sure. Pacific Northwest is beautiful. Weather's always great. I love Seattle. And there's a lot of things to do, it seems like, once you're finally in like a city. Even like free stuff. How about favorite venues?
Black Sheep in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Ever since the Flux shut down, we've been playing there. And it's a lot of the same people from the Flux, over there. And I love the staff. They're great people. So there, I like Come and Take It Live in Austin, Texas.
That's been a popular one amongst guests so far.
Great staff. Great people. I just always love it when the venue understands touring band struggles, and they have staff that understands the culture. And I guess that kind of brings up one of my other favorite venues is in Arizona, the Nile Underground. Nile Underground is those are probably my top three. Come and Take It Live, Nile Underground, and Black Sheep in Colorado.
Biggest rookie mistake being on tour?
I think that people, when it's their first tour, they over-prepare. Like, people who bring a bunch of, they'll buy, $50 worth of groceries. Day one, you're going to be burned out on all that food, I guarantee you. And touring is such a social thing that I know y'all said, y'all don't want to go to Denny's, but it's for us, after the show, we all kind of want to go out to eat, or something like that. So when you're constantly being asked by people at the show or the promoter or something like that to go eat, you don't want to turn that down every time because you're like, oh, well, I got beef jerky in the van. I'm fine,
Sure.
So you just want either the company or you want a hot meal. So I think one of the biggest rookie mistakes is people over preparing. And I think another one, honestly, is people who try to almost, I don't know if it's the right word, but like buck up almost. Like where they feel like they need to posture and act like it's not their first tour, if that makes any sense.
Kind of too cool.
Yeah, like people who are not, grateful to the promoters bringing them through. And this is a better way to streamline what I'm saying. So people who don't build relationships, if you're not building relationships when you travel, it's going to be really hard to keep doing the DIY. Let's take a scenario. You play in this city, show doesn't really do too hot. You're mad at the promoter or something because no one came to your show. He's probably not going to bring you back, And I think that goes with keeping an open mind. Because I feel like a lot of bands, they'll have lots of streams and lots of YouTube views and stuff like that. And then they do their first tour, and there's only 20 kids at the show. And they're like, well, what the fuck? Like, we have 50,000 views on YouTube. Where are all the people? And it's like, just understanding that you got to build from the bottom. First time you go somewhere, there's 20 kids or whatever. But then if you build authentic relationships with the people at your show and the promoter, the next time you come back, they're probably going to be like 30 or 50. And then it just keeps growing from there because you're not only having these people who want to come out to see the band play, they're coming out to hang out with you because you're a good dude,
One of the great debate questions. How long is too long for a string change on tour?
Man, I fucking change my strings every 3 shows. And I know that's even like a long time for some people. Like if I was balling out, I guess I would change them every day. Like if people were just throwing me strings, I change it every 3. Because if I don't, it will break on that 4th day. I have a really heavy hand, so I break strings pretty quick. But I mean, I've heard some people say they don't change their strings for like a week, and I'm just like, that's you?
That's me.
You're one of those people.
For me, though, like, I've always had really good luck with Diodario strings, and my 74 goes dull before the rest of them do.
Yeah.
So I'll just pick up, like, singles.
That makes sense. I could understand that. And it's budget conscious. So
yeah.
I get you. 8-string sets are probably expensive, too. I don't really know, but they're probably more expensive than regular ones.
There's I shouldn't say local because it's in the middle of the state and I'm on the west side of it, but there's an in-state shop in Lansing, Michigan called Elderly Instruments, and which is a cool place if you ever find yourself in Lansing and like you got a couple like hours to kill. It's this old like fire station that they turned into a guitar shop, and it's been there for a really long time. You can literally walk in there and play like a $30,000 guitar, play it through the amps there, and just be like, you know what? Not today. And they don't have any problem with that.
That's sick.
But I buy a lot of my strings through them because they're one of those places that the more you buy, the better of a deal they're going to give for you since you're ordering like quantity. Yeah. But even then, I think my packs run about $8.
Oh, that's not too bad.
So, but that's because I'm buying in bulk. If I don't buy in bulk, they're closer to 12. As you know, there's a ton of misconceptions about being in a band on the road. Lots of over-glamorizations. What's some of the wilder things you've been asked or told about being on the road?
I mean, it's usually just like Motley Crue kind of shit where people just assume that you're trashing hotel rooms every night and playing to huge arenas and just doing copious amounts of drugs and cheating on your girlfriend and, just a bunch of stuff that's just kind of ridiculous when you think about it,
Yeah.
But it's usually just from people who, they're just like casual music listeners, so they don't really understand like that there is a middle-class market for being a musician.
That's a really good way to put that.
Yeah, it's like, and it's what's keeping underground alive, is all these middle tier kind of musicians where, they can't buy a 5-car garage house with their music, but they can get by,
For sure. To further that, let's go over some of the less glamorous moments in your career.
Oh, man.
Any horror stories from the stage?
Yes. I think anyone who's met me has probably heard this story, but I've shit my pants twice on stage before. And I think that's about as not glamorous as it gets. The first time it happened was in 2012. We were playing a show at this place called The Parish in Austin, Texas. And you've seen us live before. I jump around. I do spin kicks. Like, I'm a pretty active musician. And first song, it's like an intro. I do this scissor kick, and right when I land, I just shit myself. So the whole rest of the show, I'm standing like legs together, just mortified, So everyone watching the show, they're like, what is this guy's problem? And the second we finished the show, I ran to the bathroom, put my jeans in the trash can, and luckily I had some gym shorts on me. Just switched into that and went home ass shame. The second time was in 2016 when it was the very last day of our tour with Spite and Body Snatcher. And I was wearing shorts, and same story. I did a scissor kick and landed. We'd had, I'd eaten some kind of like really hot chips or something, and we had CC's for lunch, so it just kind of turned my bowels into a slurry mess.
Oh,
and,
man.
I landed and I shit myself, and because I'm not a virgin to this experience, so I was like, it happened again. Okay, well, if I kick this turd out of my pants, we'll get on Lamb Goat. So this time I was like trying my hardest to like just throw really hard spin kicks and just keep the energy up and all that. And I remember Scuba Steve from Spite was standing side stage, and I walked over to him and I was just like, I shit my pants. and he was like, what? And I was like, I shit my pants. And so we finished the set, and I went to the bathroom, and it looked like a Bob Ross oil painting in my fucking underwear. And I ended up putting my underwear in the, the top of the toilet where you can like take the cover off.
Yeah.
I ended up putting my underwear in there. And I went out to the trailer and just baby wiped myself into oblivion. But all the baby wipes in the world aren't enough to get the shame off you.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
So that's probably the most memorable experience. I mean, one time on a tour we did in 2015, I had a really bad lung infection.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up having to go to the hospital in New Mexico because I wasn't getting any oxygens in my lungs. I have really bad asthma. And so I did a treatment there, and then we ended up still playing the show that night. So I think that's a standout moment for me, was still having the hospital wristband on my wrist and finishing the show.
Jeez.
Later that night, because I don't really do anything. I'm like a straight edge fella, so I'm pretty. I just don't know much about the world of drug use and all that. But they gave me codeine for my lung infection, and they also gave me this antibacterial thing that gives you insomnia. So I was on both of those things at the same time. So I was like fucked up on this codeine, but then I couldn't fall asleep because of my other medicine. So I was just in this weird, like, upside down style dystopia where nothing was real. And we were at an IHOP, and I thought it was a Denny's, and I ended up drinking my own piss by accident in the van because I'd peed in a bottle and forgot about it and thought it was water, and so that's probably I think that's enough horror stories.
Yeah, jeez. That's crazy. How about worst promoter or overall show experience?
Doing the DIY thing, you run into a lot of those. I think the one that comes to mind is I can't remember if it was North Carolina or South. I think it was North Carolina, because Ground Zero's in South Carolina, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was North Carolina. We were booked. I can't remember the promoter's name, and I don't think I would say it anyway. I don't want to slander him or whatever.
Sure.
But so we got booked at this vape shop or something, and we roll up, and on the marquee or whatever, which is like a chalkboard sign, it says, "Tonight, the Insvrgence." And I'd never seen our name butchered so bad. So we were laughing really hard about that. So as I was taking a picture with the marquee, the owner walks out and he's like, "Hey, are y'all the Insvrgence or whatever?" And we were like, "Yeah." and he was like, "Oh, your promoter's in jail, but you can still play the show if you want.
Oh,
It's my birthday, so people are gonna be here." So we were like, "Okay," and they ended up we didn't get paid. They gave us Faygo and hummus, which
because that goes in the gas tank very easily.
it does. Cars actually run really well on Faygo now. It's that juggalo life.
Yep.
But the promoter who was in jail actually ended up showing up to the show, and he'd just gotten out of jail or something. And there were no locals on the show. So he goes, "Hey, can me and my friend play a set?" And it was this weird, they used our gear, and it was almost, that band, the Dead Milkmen?
Yeah.
It was kind of like that, just weird, jokey, punk songs. And he's a crust punk guy. So we ended up playing the show, and him and his friend just ended up literally wrestling on the ground the entire time we were playing. And the owner of the bar and all of his friends who'd come for his birthday were just awkwardly chilling on the patio because they weren't into breakdown music. You know what I mean? So that one comes to mind as one of the weirdest shows.
Jeez. And that's that's almost up there for a very random thing to happen on tour too.
Oh yeah, dude. That was just, that's what I love about it, man. It's never a dull moment,
So I'm curious to hear what kind of advice you'd have for a few groups of people. And for starters, let's start with local bands.
I personally believe that if you don't make connections within your local community, you're not going to last. So I think when you're first starting out, you should play as many local shows as you possibly can. Make friends with all the bands in your area. Even if they're not in your genre. I mean, some of our best friends are the pop punk bands around here. So just play as often as you can to get your name established. And then through all that hard work, you can establish clout with the promoters in your area. And then you can start getting on national tours and stuff like that. So I think that's the first steps that every band should really take.
How about promoters?
It's just really important to not get in over your head. Because you're going to want to say yes to every package, at least, I would want to, just because you want to help out as many bands as possible, but if you book a show, make sure you have the guarantee available before the show, because I can't tell you how many times, at least for us when we've been on tour, promoters think that they can make up the difference from the show, and it just kind of ends up not working out,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just go into it with good intentions and don't get in over your head, and start out slow and just try to, Rome wasn't built in a day. So don't go out trying to book King 810 or something on your first booking experience,
And lastly, what advice would you give to bands hitting the road for the first time?
I would say keep an open mind. it's not, you'll go through a lot of really hard, struggles with money and just with your self-esteem, honestly, because I know it's rough when you play a show and there's only 2 people there. But, just because there's 2 people there today doesn't mean that there's only going to be 2 people there the next time you come through or the next time after that. So if you're playing a show, just try to stay positive and make real connections with whoever is at the show. And I promise that it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Let's do a plug for Insvrgence. Where's the best place to find you guys?
The best place to find us, you can find us on every social media platform. Just Insvrgence with a V. We're on all digital streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, all that.
Cool. And do you guys have any shows coming up?
We have, the next thing we'll have is a U.S. tour with Castaway that's hitting a lot of markets. We'll be playing a lot of new music on that tour, so hope to see some new and old faces, and would love to see what y'all think of the new songs.
Rafe, thank you so much for being on the show. Keep on the grind, brother. I got a lot of respect for you for keeping at this for as long as you have and really building a brand with Insvrgence, and best of luck moving forward, and hopefully our paths can cross again soon.
Thank you, Noah. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the show.
That concludes this episode. I'd like to thank Rafe for coming on the show. Be sure to check out Insvrgence discography and follow them on social media. Also be sure to check out those dates for that upcoming run with Castaway. I've been Noah Sias, and as always, thank you for listening.